In the drawdown and final decades of the British Empire, this legendary Marine served in all far-flung corners of the globe. From the bandit country of South Armagh to the deserts of Suez and the mountains of Yemen and Cyprus, he forged an extraordinary career, which culminated in his taking command of 3 Commando Brigade during the Falklands War. Today, we're looking at the life, campaigns, and most importantly, the medals of Julian Thompson. A future Major General, Julian Howard Atherton Thompson, was born in Calcutta in British India in October 1934. His father was an architect who had served in World War I, beginning as a private and ending the war as a decorated brigade major. After the Great War, returning to his civilian life, Thompson's father travelled to India to work at an architects' partnership. When World War II broke out, he joined the Indian Engineers, building airfields in the Arakan. With war breaking out, the young Thompson was unable to be sent home for boarding school. Instead, he attended prep school in Kashmir. The young Thompson finally returned to England in December 1945, aged 11. Arriving at Tilbury Docks, he witnessed the devastation brought by German air raids during the war, seeing derelict and bombed out houses. Thompson's first impression as a child of Britain was that it was cold, damp, and dreary. And I can assure you, looking out the window now, nothing's changed. Thompson would be sent to Sherborne School, an all-boys public boarding school in Dorset, England. Whilst at boarding school, he attended CCF, or Combined Cadet Force, which was mandatory for all boys at the school. The CCF was aimed to prepare the young boys for national service. He and other students would learn basic fieldcraft and tactics, drill and map reading, and shooting. Many of the teachers and CCF instructors were World War II veterans. In particular, one cadet instructor made an impression on the young Thompson, and he described him as a Navy veteran having done time on frigates and destroyers, a very ebullient character, I think that's how you pronounce it, who coached the 2nd 15 Rugger team and was a thrusting type. It's these type of thrusters that Thompson would later model himself on in his career in the Marines. Initially, Thompson had planned to join the army, as the Marines at that point in the early 50s had a requirement that any officer candidates had to pass physics, which Thompson was bad at. Luckily for him, it was later dropped, and he could then apply for the Royal Marines. That said, I have my own theories on why Thompson didn't join the army. We all know that to be a charismatic, swashbuckling army leader of the mid to late 20th century, you had to sport a pair of manly, wild and untamed bushy eyebrows, like these 3 legends of British military leadership. With not the required army regulation length of bushy browbeaters, Thompson would have to opt for the Marines. Thompson was still at school when he passed his AIB or Admiralty Interview Board, and arrived for Royal Marines Basic Officer Training in Lympstone in November 1952, one amongst 14 candidates. The vast majority were, like Thompson, aged only 18. The course would last 18 months and would be separated into 3 parts, roughly 6 months learning first to be an ordinary Marine, then learning to be a section commander, and finally progressing to platoon commander understanding. Thompson would learn naval time, i.e. being 5 minutes before, in addition to all the other skills required as a Royal Marines officer. Recruits would be beasted by day and spend 3 to 4 hours a night cleaning kit, seldom turning in before midnight. There was a heavy emphasis on PT, culminating in battle PT, i.e. doing the tests with all your kit, weapons and boots. One of the young recruits in Thompson's class was a former captain of boxing at Eton College. When a colour sergeant instructed him to spar with him, he ended up knocking out the colour sergeant. I guess that didn't go down too well. Once finished with their infantry training, Marines at the time had a choice of going either on the commando course or on a gunnery course and going to sea on big ships. Thompson much preferred the soldiering and commando side. Spending time on ships during his training, Thompson observed that Royal Navy officers were much more rank conscious than Royal Marines officers, and didn't have the same rapport that either Marines or Army officers had with their men. Not taking to this environment on ships, for Thompson it would be the commando route. In his book No Picnic, Thompson states, "I never had any doubt what the Marines were for. To provide commandos. That is where I wanted to serve, and I spent a good part of my career successfully avoiding serving in a Royal Marines detachment, in cruisers, frigates, and indeed any other sort of ship." In April 1954, Thompson would then be sent on his first deployment as a second lieutenant. He would join 40 Commando that was operating in the Suez Canal zone in Egypt. He would fly there in an Avro York airplane, the first time he had used air travel. He would initially be attached to support troop, as his assigned troop were detached in Malta on ceremonial duty. The support troop of those days would consist of a platoon each of assault engineers, machine gun and mortars. The Suez Canal zone was a key asset for the British and contained a strategic reserve of munitions and supplies left over from World War II. 2 infantry divisions, consisting at the time of 3 Commando Brigade, 16 Parachute Brigade and a further independent infantry brigade, guarded the canal. The British presence was contested by the increasingly nationalistic Egyptians. There were 2 main threats to the canal zone that the Marines were briefed on. The first were organised criminal gangs attempting to steal from the supply depots. And the second was a local Fedayeen terrorist campaign against the British, attempting to oust them from the region. Local thieves would particularly value communications cables due to the lead content, and would cut cables at 2 ends, tie one end to a vehicle and speed off with it in the desert. The Marines' main task was to guard key installations and provide mobile quick reaction support for static guards, who were Mauritians employed by the British. Of the Mauritians, Thompson stated that they were efficient and also were marvellous cooks. Apparently, they would rustle up exquisite curries and French cuisine, compared to the horrendous rations the British received. Marines also carried out nocturnal ambushes beyond the wire, hoping to intercept infiltrators moving under the cover of darkness. However, one operation went slightly awry for Thompson. Thompson's commander insisted that Thompson and his men set up their ambushes inside an unmarked minefield. The men questioned the wisdom of the order, but were told to get on with it. Ironically, it wasn't the patrol that triggered a disaster, it was the commander himself who gave the order, sending out Thompson's men overnight. The next morning, he arrived to check on Thompson's team. As he was driving towards them, his Jeep rolled over a mine, blowing a tyre clean off. That was the end of the minefield ambushes. For Thompson, his tour would be a routine of setting up nocturnal ambushes where little happened, cable patrols, and vehicle escort duties. Thompson would, however, have his first contact or interaction with hostile forces. A favoured tactic used at the time by anti-British forces was to try and barge British military vehicles off the road and into the adjacent canal. Several men had been killed this way. British rules of engagement allowed for soldiers to shoot at the tyres of vehicles that tried to conduct this. Whilst travelling as a passenger or vehicle commander in a 3-ton lorry, a local Egyptian truck tried to run Thompson's vehicle off the road. Thompson, responding, grabbed the driver's rifle, loaded it, and ordered the driver to pursue the perpetrator. After loosing off 3 rounds trying to take out the tyres, the offender's vehicle escaped into a village. Not wanting to accidentally harm any civilian bystanders, Thompson called off the pursuit. On returning to base and reporting the incident to the adjutant, Thompson was told off, saying he shouldn't have missed. In June, after spending a couple of months in the canal zone, Thompson was sent to Malta to join his assigned platoon for the Queen's official birthday parade. After 3 weeks on the island, he returned to Egypt. By then, a British withdrawal had been agreed, and Thompson found himself assigned to one of the rearguard parties. The atmosphere had noticeably eased by that point, and the work was far less tense than it had been before the agreement. The British would relocate their Suez military headquarters to Cyprus. 40 Commando would be posted to Malta. Whilst there, they would conduct 6 weeks training in Libya, learning desert warfare and culminating in a brigade exercise. Whilst back in Malta, on Christmas Day, following tradition, Royal Marines officers served the men rum and tea during the morning. After serving troops Christmas lunch, Thompson and fellow officers were then invited to the sergeant's mess in the afternoon. Thompson recalled, "That was my downfall. My troop sergeant and I split a bottle of Drambuie between us. He certainly did for me that day, and I missed the officers' Christmas dinner." Speaking of the troop sergeant, he said, "I don't think he was deliberately trying to torpedo me, but being an Irishman, he liked the bottle himself, and was too over-enthusiastic with the amount he pushed on me." This self-inflicted wound would cost Thompson a few extra duties and a lecture from his troop commander about reaching one's limit. In 1955, Thompson then returned to the UK for a series of officer package training courses. These included a roughly 1-month winter warfare course in Aviemore in Scotland and a 9-month junior officers war course at Greenwich Naval College in Greenwich, London. The course was mainly aimed at naval sub-lieutenants and focused on a rigid technical curriculum of maths, physics and chemistry. For Thompson, it seemed largely irrelevant for Royal Marines officers unless you were going on a ship's detachment. He recalled, "It was hours of dreary mathematics and chemistry that I hated." Offering no value to Commando's officers, Thompson was totally bored. He described his experience in Greenwich as a complete waste of time, although it was fun socially. Clearly a swinging bachelor at the time, he recalled, "It was so close to London. I had lots of girlfriends in London and had a smashing time insofar as my pocket allowed me to." He then went on to a small arms course and finally a platoon commander's course in Warminster, which he found thoroughly useful. For a time, he also served as an instructor on the Royal Marines Recruits Commando course. In late 1957, Thompson rejoined 40 Commando, who was still in Malta, and in January 1958, the unit deployed to Cyprus. At the time, the EOKA insurgency was ongoing, a violent nationalist campaign in which Greek Cypriot militants sought to end British rule and unite the island with mainland Greece. Placed in command of 2 platoons, Thompson would be given responsibility for 80 square miles in the Troodos Mountains. Living in a monastery, his troops would be in charge of the security of 3 Greek Cypriot villages. The Royal Marines would be provided with a book containing pictures of the most wanted terrorist operatives and would spend their time conducting search and cordon operations, infiltrating villages at night, and attempting to uncover hides. During one operation named Kingfisher, poor senior liaison on communication led to a dangerous incident when Thompson's men were accidentally fired on by Mad Mitch's Argylls. Unaware that the Marines were operating in the area, the Argylls heard movement in the dark and opened fire. The bootnecks immediately shouted for them to stop, and once the jocks recognised familiar voices, the shooting finally ceased. Thompson then moved on to further training and instructor roles within the United Kingdom, until he was deployed to Yemen in 1961 with 4-5 Commando. In Yemen, Thompson would command the support company based in Little Aden. His primary focus would be escorting supply convoys making their way up country to Dala. Travelling through mountainous terrain and narrow passes, Royal Marines would have to picket the hills to dominate the high ground as the convoy passed through. In terrain akin to the northwest frontier, the troops would be subject to sniping from tribesmen. Luckily, Thompson's company didn't suffer any losses, although tragically, the officers' mess fridge became a casualty. I guess there would be no chilled gin and tonics for a while. Thompson said, "Tribesmen carried a weapon as a sign of manhood and importance, and they were bloody good at fieldcraft. One of their favourite tricks was to cover themselves in rocks so that they were almost impossible to see. The tribesmen would leave a slit at the front of the rock to aim their rifle or weapon out of and remain undetected. Speaking of the northwest frontier, with Christmas coming, why not indulge in a copy of Clasps of Courage? Learn about forgotten campaigns on the frontier and across India and further afield, in addition to becoming an overnight expert on the India General Service Medal 1854. An Amazon link is in the channel description. After this tour in Yemen, Thompson would go on to a period as adjutant of 4-3 Commando, which was part of Britain's Strategic Reserve based back in the UK. Once taking part in an exercise with Norwegians, whilst being transported in an American helicopter, himself and other HQ staff were dropped in the wrong place and taken prisoner by the Norwegians. Of being a POW in an exercise, Thompson recalled, "It was a very degrading thing for an adjutant." In 1965, Thompson would attend Staff College. Whilst there, and as a student, a dinner was held for Field Marshal Viscount Bill Slim. Before dinner, Slim spoke to Thompson and said, "Oh, you're a Marine, are you? Well, when I was Chief of the Imperial Staff, the First Sea Lord offered to hand you lot over to the Army to do what we liked with in exchange for my support for some new carriers the Navy wanted." I guess that highlights the contentious relationship the Royal Navy and the Marines would have over the years. From 1966, he would be posted to the Far East in Singapore in a staff role, providing logistic support and drafting contingency planning. Part of his role would be supporting British operations in Borneo. Apparently, the British forces in Borneo had access to the Armalite before the Americans. As an observer, he got to witness a final training exercise in Queensland of elements of the Australian task force heading to Vietnam in 1966. In 1967, Thompson would also be heavily involved in planning the British withdrawal from Aden. Over the next few years, Thompson would take on a variety of roles and steadily rise in rank and experience. He would spend time as a brigade major conducting exercises with NATO Southern Forces, including Greek Marines, Turkish and Italian military, French Foreign Legion, and US Marines. Of the Turkish military, Thompson stated, "We had respect for the Turks. They were tough, cheerful, get-on-with-it types." He also had a high opinion of the French Foreign Legion. "Fantastic, the sort of soldiers you want on your side. Well-officered and highly professional chaps." However, on one exercise in Sardinia, Thompson was a bit bemused when discussing planning with an Italian staff officer, when the officer questioned why there was no time for lunch and became upset that the Royal Marines wanted the exercise to operate on a 24-hour-a-day, 5 days a week schedule. The Italian officer stated, "Night is for love-making, not for fighting." Thompson would then go on to a period as an instructor with directing staff at Joint Staff College, before being promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and given command of 40 Commando in 1975. He would take them on exercise in the Caribbean, before ramping up for a 4-month tour of Northern Ireland in 1976. 40 Commando would operate in South Armagh, Bandit Country, relieving 3 Para. Being briefed by top brass, his main responsibility was to prevent sectarian killings occurring in his AOR, or Area of Responsibility. Under high pressure, Thompson was briefed by his brigade commander called Richardson, furthermore, that if any of his Marines wandered accidentally south of the border, or if a train was successfully hijacked by the IRA in his area, he would be on the next boat home. Due to the high threat in South Armagh, much British troop movement would be conducted by helicopter, and indeed the British Army base's helipad at Bessbrook at one point became the busiest helipad in Europe. The area of operations for the Royal Marines contained the urban settlements of Crossmaglen and Newry. Responsibility for the troops included maintaining order between the religious communities in Newry, manning vehicle checkpoints, guarding vital infrastructure, gathering intelligence, conducting arrest raids, and patrolling the border area. IRA operators would lay booby traps for British soldiers that were activated either by command wire or remote controlled. Increasingly, they were remote controlled due to the technological advances the IRA were having at the time. Some IEDs would be manufactured within beer kegs and placed in vehicles or under culverts and roads. Helicopters would face a threat from small arms fire or RPGs. Mainly in the rural areas, Marines would also be targeted with sniper fire. IRA snipers would even set up across the border, aiming into Northern Ireland, although at that point for Thompson's men, sniping was not as a great threat as IEDs, RPGs or mortars. On one occasion, a mortar impact caused at least 6 casualties in Crossmaglen. Thompson recalled of 40 commandos tour in Northern Ireland, 69 shootings were recorded and about 1 IED incident occurred per week. In July 1978, Thompson was promoted to colonel. After 40 Commando, he then served as staff officer with Headquarters Commando Forces in Plymouth, and with that tour complete, was back in London attending the Royal College of Defence Studies. Promoted Brigadier, in 1981, Thompson took over command of 3 Commando Brigade. 3 Commando Brigade would be the main British ground force during the Falklands War, and lead the land campaign that defeated Argentine forces. Containing thousands of bootnecks and reinforced with paras, at the time, 3 Commando Brigade would have constituted the creme de la creme, or tip of the spear, of British infantry. Having just returned from Denmark planning an exercise, Thompson was woken up in his bed at 2 a.m. and informed of the invasion. Speaking of the initial chaos, Thompson recalled, "Everyone was caught with their trousers down. This wasn't on the menu at all. Although the Navy were getting ready, they had forgotten to tell the Marines. The book marked Mission Impossible was opened and we were told to get on with it." Bringing the brigade to short notice, Thompson would then consult with the amphibious force commander Mike Clapp. Giving plenty of warning, Thompson and Commodore Clapp flew by helicopter to Admiral Fieldhouse's headquarters at Northwood. Major General Jeremy Moore, Thompson's boss, also came with the pair. Illustrative of the initial chaos, Thompson states in his book, No Picnic, "On arrival, we could see no helipad. The pilot consulted his helicopter landing site directory. Apparently, this major NATO and national headquarters did not have a helipad. The pilot tried to put down in a playground adjacent to the headquarters. Frantic housewives dashed out of the houses bordering the playground as the roto downwash blew away their washing and covered them with dust. Fearful of our treatment at the hands of the women, who were by now trying to hold down their skirts, retrieve their washing, cover their ears and shake their fists at us, we beat a retreat to seek another place to set down. A games field, some distance away, was the best we could find. As we stepped out of the helicopter, a Land Rover appeared. This was the landing site for the headquarters, we were informed. The pilot's comment on organisations that failed to notify or mark the location of their helipads was unrepeatable. The atmosphere of farce which marked our arrival persisted. No one seemed to know why we had come. Thompson, being the consummate military professional commander that he was, would overcome these teething challenges and successfully set off on time with his brigade. Speeding south, by the time the task force reached Ascension Island, they were low on fuel. Helping their old friends, the American Air Force set up tanker relays to refill the fuel depot on the island. This ensured the task force got away promptly without any delays. In the Falklands campaign, Thompson would face significant challenges: extreme logistics and distance, harsh terrain and weather, an enemy with a numerical strength, limited fire support, and time pressure. Another headache for Thompson was inter-service priorities competing with each other. Thompson felt that steely-eyed submariner Sandy Woodward wasn't giving enough priority or precedence to the air threat and focusing too much on the surface or submarine threat. Traditionally, the Navy and Marines would usually resolve their differences in either two ways: a drinking competition or a brawl on Union Street at 2 a.m. Thompson, Woodward and Clapp would work together on these issues to iron them out. Thompson also had concerns over a zany plan by the MOD to build an airfield on West Falkland. Political pressures as well, such as a lack of mission statement, differing strategic objectives and an opaque command structure, only exacerbated problems for Thompson. However, in the best traditions of the British Armed Forces, All commanders were able to overcome these Herculean challenges and defeat the Argentine military, a feat judged by the Soviets and US Marines as impossible for the British to accomplish. In his book No Picnic, Thompson's first-hand account really goes into the detail about the campaign, the planning, pressures, mistakes and the reality faced by the troops. I really recommend reading his book, which although isn't a light read and is fairly technical from a military perspective, really goes into extraordinary granular level detail about the campaign. Of the Argentine Air Force, Thompson stated, "I admired them tremendously, but by God they were dangerous." In the years after the war, Thompson appeared in numerous documentaries and interviews about the Falklands conflict. A suave, debonair military version of Nigel Havers, he no doubt sent pulses racing and hearts aflutter among 1980s housewives watching at home. His first book, No Picnic, was published in the mid-1980s, whilst Thompson was still serving in the Royal Marines. After the war, Thompson would be placed in command of Special Forces, working on training for the Special Boat Service. During that time, he was promoted to Major General. In 1986, Thompson decided to retire. His awards are Companion of the Order of the Bath, Officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE military version, Naval General Service Medal with Canal Zone and Cyprus clasps, General Service Medal with Northern Ireland clasp. I believe as he was based in Yemen before the Radfan campaign or aid in emergency, he didn't qualify for either a Radfan or South Arabia clasp. I could be wrong, but that's my impression. South Atlantic Medal with Rosette. He also has a 1977 Queen Elizabeth Jubilee Medal. After retiring as a Major General from the Royal Marines, Thompson turned to writing and studying military history. An accomplished author, he has written several books on military history. He was also, for around a decade, a senior research fellow focusing on logistics and armed conflict at King's College London, and since 1997 served as a visiting professor in the Department of War Studies there. Thompson also became involved in public commentary and advocacy on defence issues, including chairing the group Veterans for Britain. In researching this video, I spent hours listening to Major General Thompson being interviewed for the Imperial War Museum archives. For a man that achieved so much in life, to me he appeared extremely humble. He comes across as a very sharp, extremely intelligent and down-to-earth individual with a healthy sense of humour. A quote from Thompson which best describes his leadership style is as follows: "You should love your men, otherwise you shouldn't command them." I've heard Thompson described as a modest yet uncompromising leader, with genuine care and respect for his own men, and who was held in high esteem by the Royal Marines that served under him. I do think Britain was lucky to have such military leaders of his calibre during the Falklands War. Thanks for watching. I hope you found some value from this, and I'll see you in the next one.